San Francisco for the man known as the Zodiac Killer.
A man in a mask robbed, tied, and stabbed them, leaving
San
them for
Francisco
dead.
has another freak killer on the loose.
I have to kill you. The boy asked him, said, "Do you really mean that?" And he said, "Yes, I mean it."
During December of 1968 to October of the following year, among the people in the California Bay Area, there was a deranged individual who enjoyed killing and sending cryptic messages to police and media taunting them. A total of 7 people had been confirmed victims of the Zodiac. 2 of them survived, but the rest were not so fortunate. December 20th, 1968. His first attack would take place on a small turnout from Lake Herman Road. The victims would be 2 teenagers, Betty Lou Jensen and David Arthur Faraday, only 16 and 17 years old. They had just finished attending a school concert and were on their first date together. After their concert ended at 10 p.m, they both got on David's station wagon, arriving at the turnout 10:15. And just over 1 hour later, their bodies would be reported by witness Stella Borges driving by the scene at roughly 11:20 p.m. The last witness to have passed by before Stella would be around 11:14 p.m, which means the killer only had 6 minutes to commit the crime and get away from the scene. The strange thing about this witness is, he recalled seeing David's wagon parked along with another vehicle next to it, but he couldn't remember any details about the second car, but didn't see anyone inside either of them, and also at the same time didn't see anyone including any bodies in the surrounding area. One logical explanation I can think of is, both David and Betty were just out of view, meaning they were both below the line of sight. This makes sense as they were on a turnout known as Lover's Lane. As for the other vehicle, the lack of information is preventing any sound assumptions. After having seen the bodies, Stella rushed in the direction to Berryessa to get help, where she met an officer. Then at 11:28 p.m, he arrived at the scene and found Betty had completely passed on, but could still see David breathing, because on this night it was especially cold at 35 degrees Fahrenheit. Unfortunately, he would pass on before arriving at the hospital. Due to this temperature, finding shoe prints and other evidence like tire tracks proved almost impossible as the ground was frozen. Given all this information, the Zodiac had been extremely lucky, with James Owen passing by and not paying attention to his car, or anyone being close enough to the scene to have spotted something. This is enough coincidences to believe that Owen, who was the last witness to have passed by before the attack took place, is a possible suspect. But upon reading the police reports, there was no one suspecting him nor thoroughly questioning him, so he wasn't completely ruled out as a suspect. Watching the most in-depth documentary there is about the Zodiac, one of the detectives who was in charge of assisting the main team personally said that since this crime was so unusual and no one had experience with this type of killer before, the Solano County Sheriff's Department, which was responsible for the solving of this, was at a complete loss for what to do. The more you look into what happened on this day, the more confusing it gets, as there was another couple that was in the same turnout just before David and Betty from 9:30 until 10, and the boyfriend had his statement taken by the police. It goes like this: William Crow and his girlfriend were testing out the girl's new sports car when they parked for a little break in the turnout, luckily with the front of the car facing the road. Then another vehicle that was driving by coming from Berryessa passing them, when all of a sudden it stopped and started to reverse back to them. Feeling something was off, William quickly started the car and pulled off towards Berryessa, with the other car following them. At this point, William was approaching a fork in the road and took a sharp right turn. Since the car following them was larger, it couldn't make the turn at that speed. He then stopped in the middle of the road while the other car did the same, and after a couple of minutes of shouting at them, William drove away. According to the statement, he claims he saw 2 Caucasian males in the car, with one of them, the driver, wearing glasses and having short hair. Wait, I thought the Zodiac was only one person. Well, if you look at the evidence they did get from the murder scene, specifically the bullets and casings they managed to retrieve, the reports tell us that David was shot just once behind the left ear, the bullet traveling straight to the brain, knocking him down. But Betty was shot several times before collapsing 28 feet from the car. The anomaly in this situation is, after examining the ammunition, the DOJ discovered all the bullets except the one found in David had right-hand groove class characteristics, meaning that the bullet and the gun used had ridges and a threaded barrel to make the bullet spin in a clockwise motion. Usually in firearms, the bullet doesn't get shot straight out the barrel. There's a thread inside with small ridges on the bullet to generate a spinning motion, thus giving the bullet more penetrating power and the ability to stay in a straight path, but not all guns and ammo use the same direction ridges nor the same barrel. Given this information, it's possible to conclude that the gun used with David was different from the gun used on Betty, thus giving the theory that there was two killers instead of one more credibility, and the fact that David had a more execution style killing, though he was closer, while Betty was more rushed and appeared to be running away. If you consider there was just two guns and not two people, and assuming Betty had started to run when she saw what happened to David, why would you waste the time it took to switch weapons? July 4th, 1969. Another young couple would be the target of a vicious attack. This incident would take place in Blue Rock Springs Park, only 3 miles away from the previous murder site. Similar to the Lake Herman case, Darlene Elizabeth Farron and Michael Renault Magoo would be parked in a spot where lots of couples go, making it another lover's lane that's quite well known among the locals. The exact time is unknown, but they arrived at the park between 11:50 p.m. and midnight, and at 10 minutes past midnight, the police received a call from a witness saying they saw two teenagers were being shot at. Since it was 1969 and mobile phones were still not accessible, the witness had no choice but to travel to the nearest point where they could send a message from, which took them about 6 to 7 minutes, meaning the time of the shooting was roughly 3 minutes past midnight. Darlene unfortunately passed away before arriving at the hospital, but David, who was sitting in the side closest to the shooter, had survived, although it appears he sustained substantial damage affecting his speech. A few minutes before the shooting occurred, Michael would report seeing a car pull up to the left side of their vehicle, turn off their lights, and sit there for a minute. 5 minutes later, the same vehicle returned but parked approximately 10 feet behind and slightly to the right. Exiting the car would be a lone male with a flashlight, specifically a high-powered flashlight, the type you carry with a handle, and a 9mm handgun. From this, Michael believed the man to be a police officer, but when he got close enough, suddenly the man raised his pistol and started shooting, firing 5 rounds through the open window. Michael said it sounded like it had a silencer on it, but as he got the full initial brunt of the attack, you could assume that his hearing was affected from the damage and how close he was to the firearm. After the first round of bullets, Michael had been shot in the jaw and shoulder, flinging himself in the backseat of the car. However, Darlene had been hit in a fatal area, which was just a few inches down from her right armpit. Having finished his attack, the Zodiac was on his way back to his car when he started to hear Michael making some noise, most likely because he was in a lot of pain. He then returned to the victim's car and shot each of them twice more. The big turnaround in this case was Michael had survived and at the same time had seen his attacker. He was a heavy-set man standing at 5 foot 8 inches tall, beefy build but not blubbery fat, possibly 195 to 200 pounds. Short curly hair, light brown, almost blonde. He added that the man was not wearing glasses, however stressed that his assailant did possess a particularly large face. "40 minutes past midnight, a call was coming in. Police respondent Nancy Slover picked up.
Vallejo Police Department.
I want to report a double murder.
Yeah, yes, your
Go
name
1
and where
mile
you're calling.
east on Columbus Parkway, public park. You'll find kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye.
Less than a month later, he sent out letters, each containing 2 pages of writing, and the receivers were the Vallejo Times newspaper, San Francisco Examiner, and the San Francisco Chronicle. In all the letters he drew a target sign at the end of them, but at that moment he still didn't give himself the Zodiac name. Along with each letter also contained one part of his infamous cipher, which the Zodiac stated himself when solved would contain his identity. To make sure the papers printed his cipher, he also stated, "If you do not print this cipher, I will go on a kill rampage Friday night. This will last the whole weekend. I will cruise around killing people who are alone at night until Sunday night, or until I kill a dozen people." After the release of the cipher in the paper, it took around a week before it was cracked by 2 school teachers. In Washington, the FBI worked on their own solution, and they had reached the same solution as the teachers, and the cipher was confirmed. The contents read like this: "I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all. To kill something gives me the most thrilling experience. It is even better than getting your rocks off with a girl. The best part of it is, when I die, I will be reborn in paradise, and all the lone or stray people I have killed will become my slaves. I will not give you my name because you will try to slow down or stop my collecting of slaves for my afterlife." The last 18 characters of the cipher still remain unsolved even to this day. A few days before the cipher was solved, the killer sent a second letter which included more evidence that was hidden from the public to further prove that he was in fact the perpetrator of these murders. In this letter, instead of starting off with "I'm the killer" or "this is the murderer," he starts off with "This is the Zodiac speaking," infamously starting his legacy which would remain unsolved for more than half a century. Also, it should be noted that in all the letters written by the Zodiac, as well as the ciphers, there's a lot of misspellings and incorrect grammar. September 27th, 1969. Only 3 months later compared to a previous 6-month period would the Zodiac strike again. Only this time the attack would take place while the sun was still up compared to the 2 previous ambushes which happened at night. Victims Brian Calvin Hartnell and Cecilia Ann Shepard were enjoying a picnic when all of a sudden at 6:20 p.m. Cecilia stated that she saw a man acting strange, then hide himself behind a tree when he got to a certain distance. Brian comforted her by saying the man was probably just looking for somewhere to take a quick bathroom break. After reappearing from behind the tree, the man was now wearing a black executioner's hood and waistline bib bearing the infamous Zodiac sign on it. He was also wearing sunglasses. When describing the outfit, Brian would say the cross was symmetrical and even, suggesting that this was something of quality and took some time. At this moment, the Zodiac already had his gun drawn, pointing it at the couple, but strangely this time he actually talked with them before brutally attacking them. I'm guessing because the gun would be too loud and attract attention. He would say that he just escaped from prison and he only wants their car keys and money. After this, he would then ask Cecilia to tie up Brian, then he would bound Cecilia himself. After making sure both victims were thoroughly tied up, he put away his gun and proceeded to take out a foot-long blade and assault both of them numerous times. Brian would be stabbed a total of 6 times in the back, whereas Cecilia had a total of 10 wounds in her back and in her front, because after seeing what happened to Brian, she started to panic and thrash about. After finishing his attack thinking both victims were dead or at least past the point of being saved, the Zodiac headed away, but before leaving the scene, he wrote on the door of the couple's car, Vallejo 12-20-68, 74-69, September 27-69, 6:30, by knife. The dates of his previous crimes: Lake Herman, Blue Rock Springs, and now Lake Berryessa. Fortunately, nearby there was a man who was enjoying his day in the lake with his boat. He had heard the cries of Brian and headed to a nearby resort to get help. After this, Brian managed to get himself to the closest road in the area, where a park ranger who was passing by luckily spotted him and called for help. Since Lake Berryessa is quite out of the way, by the time the ambulance had reached them, it was already 7:55 p.m. Thankfully, the man who was driving the boat had brought help from the nearby resort, which aided the injured couple from 7:10 p.m. until the ambulance had arrived. At approximately 7:40 p.m., police had arrived on the scene and found both Brian and Cecilia still capable of talking and managed to get statements from both of them, including a rough idea of what their attacker looked like. Cecilia's questioning goes like this: "What color was his hair?" "Brown." "What race was he?" "He was white." "How about his eyes? Could you see the color of his eyes?" No, he had dark glasses on underneath the hood, but his hair hung down across his forehead and was showing through the eye holes. Just maybe a little taller than you, maybe an inch. Deputy Collins was 5 foot 10 inches. Unfortunately, Cecilia would pass away 2 days after being admitted to hospital due to the severity of her wounds. Later in hospital, Brian Hartnell described his attacker as having brown hair, 225 to 250 pounds in weight, and 5 foot 8 to 5 foot 10 in height, but admitted he was a bad judge of height because he was so tall. He also thought the Zodiac to be around 20 to 30 years old based on his voice. The police this time managed to extract a shoe print nearby, which was then sent to an artist who made a plastic replica of what the shoe looked like. Good due diligence led the investigators to Travis Air Force Base in Solano County, located close to the middle of where all 3 murder sites took place. Accompanied by a special agent from the CSI, they managed to find within the stock of the airbase the shoe they were looking for. This shoe was government issued for personnel, but also for employees who worked there. It should also be noted that many shoe companies like Clark had similar designs which were released at the time. Going back to the day of the attack now, while the police just arrived at the scene, the Zodiac decided to do another phone call.
Napa Police Department. I want to report a murder. A double murder. They're 2 miles north of parking headquarters. They were in a white Volkswagen Carmen E. I'm the one that did it.
Immediately after the call ended, police dispatched 2 officers to the payphone where they had traced the call was coming from. When they got there, they found the phone hanging down and managed to retrieve a palm print from the handle. Earlier that day, close to where Brian and Cecilia would be attacked, 3 college girls would park their car and go sunbathing. They stated that a white male driving a silver or light blue Chevrolet 2-door sedan with California plates on parked his car just behind their unoccupied car and remained in his vehicle for around 30 minutes. They later said they spotted him watching them sunbathe from about 40 to 50 feet away and would be walking around every now and then looking back at them. They described him as being 28 to 40 years old, 225 pounds, stocky build, 6 feet tall, black hair with rounded eyes and thin lips. One girl thought she saw a white belt and another thought she saw something resembling a white t-shirt hanging out the back. Now it's almost confirmed this was the Zodiac, as when he confronted the couple, he was carrying white plastic clothesline in his rear pocket that could have been potentially hanging out, making it visible. 11th October 1969. By what seems like a much more confident and refined killer, only 11 days after Lake Berryessa, the Zodiac would decide to take his crimes to the middle of a residential area known as Presidio Heights, the most expensive neighborhood in San Francisco. The victim this time would be a single man going by the name of Paul Lee Stein. The unsuspecting taxi driver would start his shift that day at 8:45 p.m. After finishing his first fare of the night, he would make his way to Union Square, a very popular spot in the city, in hopes of picking up his next customer, which happened at 9:40 p.m. Then driving that man to the intersection of Washington and Cherry Street. Unfortunately, the person who Paul had picked up was a crazed murderer who had already taken the lives of 4 people, and at 9:55 p.m, in the moment of the taxi stopping, he pulled out a 9mm handgun and shot him just once in the back of the head, killing him instantly. Just across the street, 3 teenagers had started watching from the window of their house. Although surprisingly they hadn't heard any gunshots, and in their statement they said they only witnessed the following actions. The killer then ripped off a patch of Paul's shirt from his lifeless body. After that, he was seen wiping down several places in the car, presumably to get rid of any fingerprints. By account of the witnesses, he then casually walked away from the scene. It was by now the teenagers had already called the police. Just as the Zodiac had started walking away, one of the teenage witnesses very naively left the house in pursuit of the suspect to get a closer view of him and what happened in the car. She was only 16 and felt safe enough to do so, as she thought he only had a knife, since she didn't hear any shots fired and saw a glint when the suspect was still in the car. However, before she could reach the car and see the bloody mess left behind, Officer Amend and his partner pulled up on the scene. Immediately the girl pointed out the suspect as he was still in sight. Officer Amend firstly checked out the car. After that, he decided to slowly follow the suspect because of reasoning that you could only describe as paranoia. I walked that way myself. I did not run because there are innumerable alcoves and parked cars. So I went down following every technique I knew so I didn't get my head blown off. Coming from another direction was Officer Donald Folk and his partner. They were driving down Jackson Street towards the scene when at an intersection they saw a lone white male. They stopped him and asked him if he saw anyone acting strange or suspicious, and were told by him there was this man who was running by waving a gun. Upon hearing this, Officer Donald and his partner left the man alone, speeding off. With Officer Amand still walking up Cherry Street, he met Officer Donald close to the intersection. They discussed their next moves and Amand corrected the dispatch message to white male adult, as described by the 16-year-old witness. Officer Donald then said he had just stopped someone fitting the description. They quickly backtracked down Jackson Street, but by this point, the man was long gone. Military police was shortly called onto the scene as well as detectives. Along with them, they had brought 7 of the best search dogs in the country and fire trucks fixed with spotlights. Even after all that effort, the killer was still nowhere to be found. The suspect was described as white male adult, in his early 40s, 5'8", heavy build, reddish blonde crew cut hair, wearing eyeglasses, dark brown trousers, dark navy blue or black parka jacket, dark shoes. Following the crime by 2 days, the Zodiac sent in another letter, only this time the San Francisco Chronicle would be the only recipient. Along with the letter, half of the patch taken from Paul's shirt would be included. The letter reads like so. This is the Zodiac speaking. I am the murderer of the taxi driver over by Washington and Maple Street last night. To prove this, here is a blood-stained piece of his shirt. I am the same man who did in the people in the North Bay area. The San Francisco police could have caught me last night if they had searched the park properly instead of holding road races with their motorcycles, seeing who could make the most noise. The car drivers should have just parked their cars and sat there quietly waiting for me to come out of cover. School children make nice targets. I think I shall wipe out a school bus some morning, just shoot out the front tire and then pick off the kiddies as they come bouncing out. He states that he was hiding in the park nearby. If you assume he's saying the truth from this, you can assume that he just waited for all the police to leave, then just go home freely. Later on the 18th of October, Police Captain Martin Lee, who was in charge of the search, stated in an article of the Chronicle that his boast of being in the area we were searching is a lie. We had the whole area flooded with lights. We had 7 police dogs and a large number of patrolmen searching the area, tree by tree and bush by bush. The dogs are the best in the country. A mouse couldn't have escaped our attention. Even though the Zodiac had been seen wiping the scene, police still managed to extract fingerprints from spots on the taxi that were concurrently confirmed by the 3 teenage witnesses that he had indeed touched. This is the Zodiac speaking. I thought you would need a good laugh before you hear the bad news. You won't get the news for a while yet. P.S. Could you print this new cipher in your front page? I get awfully lonely when I am ignored. So lonely I could do my thing. Along with the postcard came another cipher, only this time it took 51 years for it to be solved. Here's a graph showing the time in which the letters were received and which one included ciphers. While reading about the crimes, I came across a few weird occurrences which I will now go through in chronological order. Lastly, the murder at Presidio Heights. This one seems like the most logical crime. There is a high chance the Zodiac is among one of these men, or perhaps more than one. In 2021, a team of 40+ former investigators who call themselves the Case Breakers claimed to have found the Zodiac's true identity. There is a fictional story, Berkeley Guns, written by a Lenny Heller, which is eerily similar to what the Zodiac was to do later that year. Successfully engaged and humiliated the combined police forces of the Bay Area. The pigs, I'm sure, must be frantically searching their suburban communities for the bombs we warned of. 2. He received 7 months in military code work, then worked as an instructor in cryptography for a short while. 3. He apparently knew the family of victim Darlene Ferrin and placed 3 separate calls within 1 hour and a half after her death to each family member. These calls were made before media announcement of the murder.